What does it take to create a vibrant, thriving life? First, the sad news is that Thoreau was right. Most people are leading quiet lives of desperation, lacking in meaning, fulfillment, and vitality. But we choose more. We choose to create extraordinary lives. And the Art of Vibrant Living show entertains you with inspiration, empowerment, and education to create your life into a masterpiece. It's time. Let's vibe up. Aloha, y'all. Daniel Aaron here. I'm your host, and this is the Art of Vibrant Living show, which, yes, is about entertainment, and we're going to have an amazing, fun, deeply informative, and powerful show today. I have an incredible guest I'll tell you about in a moment, and the value that you receive from that will increase dramatically if you go beyond entertainment and make a commitment right now that, you know what, I'm going to take at least one of the many gold nuggets that come to you from our guest today and apply them. Like, try them out. Do something with it in your life, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And y'all, speaking of your vibrant, thriving life, if you would like some support, if you know there's more possible for you, if you're moving away from something, creating something, I would love to connect with you, have a conversation. You can send me an email, daniel@danielaaron.com, and we will find a time, create a time to speak together. For now, though, let me tell you about an amazing person who is with us today. Ed Fell is, I'm happy to say, a friend, a teacher, a mentor, an incredibly humble yet deeply experienced man, right? He's got all kinds of accolades, and you can read about his certifications and his pedigrees and degrees and all of that. And I think in some ways he'd prefer me to just share with you that he's a deeply caring servant of truth and love, right? He's an inner explorer, a teacher, a storyteller, an elder, a spiritual guide, a shadow work guide, life and relationship coach, sacred sexuality coach. He's an amazing guy with incredible humility and heart. We're blessed to have him with us today. Ed, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's great to see you and great to be here. Aloha.
Yeah, awesome. Aloha, yes. And you're one of the few guests I have that's actually on the same island, right? So that's awesome.
Yes,
I can
neighbor.
wave to you up the hill there somewhere. Yeah. So, Ed, you've I only read a tiny bit of your experience and what you're up to in the world. And as an elder and someone who's not only deeply committed to service, you're also someone who's deeply committed to your own work, right? And I know that continues to be part of who you are and what informs what you bring to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Would you take us back a little bit, though? How did you get to this? How did you get on the path of becoming who you've become now?
Before I speak to that, I just want to give a moment to remember the people that have lived on this land, on Maui, in Haiku. And I'm remembering my teachers and support people, and I appreciate the land here where I live and the people who have lived there before. But so
That's
going
great.
back,
Thank you. Yeah.
how I began, I think I was born into this. I remember my first mystical experience happened when I was just 3, around the same time that night my grandfather died. I was there. And something was infused in me at that point, and it began to grow and grow and grow. And then along the way, I've it's never been a direct linear process of aging and learning. It's always been circular and with many different teachers and detours and twists and turns, much like our road to Hana here on Maui. but somehow that journey has always taken me to true north, the place of truth, and love. That's like you said. Along the way, one of the major things that happened in my life, or not, didn't happen to me, because that sounds like no, I chose to do the Mankind Project weekend in 1991, and of all the things that I've experienced in my lifetime, this is the most important one in my adult life, and it really propelled me on another journey of learning and growth, and learning from different teachers, and learning by being of service. It was an amazing, amazing event for me. Can I speak to you how I got there?
Yeah, please. Yeah, the floor is yours, my friend.
I had a very, very close friend on the East Coast, and we used to run workshops together all the time, really successful, wonderful workshops. And he saw in me that something was missing. And he had done this Mankind Project weekend. At the time, it was called New Warrior Training Adventure. And he encouraged me to go. And immediately, my whole body said, yes, I have to do it. And he said to me in a conversation, you'll also have something that I really want you to look at: how much you're engaged with your own image of being a nice guy in the world. So I flew from Philadelphia, where I lived, into Milwaukee, and did this amazing weekend. But before I did the weekend, I was ashamed of the word warrior, the New Warrior Training Adventure, because I was a Vietnam protester and all that coming up. And the word warrior had such violent connotations to me. So I figured I'm going to call the person that I'm most afraid of telling. I'm going to tell them what I'm going to do. So I called, you guessed it, my mother. And I said, Mom, I have something to tell you. I'm going to go off and do some of my own work at the New Warrior Training. And I said it really loud. And then there was silence on the other end of the line. At that moment, I'm thinking, all right, I'm out of the will. I'm cut off. I'm done. And then she said one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. It was only 3 words she said. It's about time.
Oh.
And then she followed up by saying, I bet you haven't cried since you were 8 years old.
Wow.
And she was right. And as soon as she said, I bet you haven't cried since I could feel this lump happening in my throat of all those emotions that I wasn't allowed to feel as a child, trying to come up through my neck. And just feeling that discomfort of needing this old message to push those messages down. Don't cry, I'll give you something to cry about. That was ingrained in me. So, of course, then on the Mankind Project weekend, I found my grief, I found my tears, I found a lot more than that as well. But it's been part of my life ever since.
That's amazing. Okay. So that brought up about 48 questions for me, just in that little bit that you shared there. And I think one of the first things to maybe pull apart a little bit, because I imagine if it popped in as a curiosity for me, it might for others as well. Because, of course, we met in part through that New Mankind Project. And so I know what you're talking about with that. However, prior to my involvement, and for me years ago, and I've got my own journey that I remember in my 20s realizing I was a snag. Somebody called me out on being a snag. Snag stands for sensitive new age guy, right? Like really attached to being nice. So, a variation on that. And, when you mentioned having a, I don't know, sensitivity around the word warrior or discomfort with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's evolved for me, but I used to think of warrior as being really like the opposite of somebody, as a man who would cry, right?
Right.
So I'm curious about, you're telling your mother that you're going to go do this warrior training, and then she says, and I bet you haven't cried since you were 8. Like, even now, part of me goes, well, that's a non sequitur. How did that work? How did she get to that? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I'm not sure. I just know that something in me was missing. And I was hiding behind my nice guy persona throughout the whole world in my therapy practice I was running and a business I was running. And what I found and discovered over these last 30 some years of being with the Mankind Project was that a warrior without compassion is just a tyrant. At the same time, a man must also he must have his compassion, but he also must have his strength to be effective. They need each other.
Yeah.
And without me connecting to my emotional body, I did it through my head. It was a cognitive understanding of my emotions. It wasn't a felt experience of my emotions.
Yep.
And I needed to find a way to combine the warrior in me with compassion and let them marry together and meld together. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. The image that came to me, I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was really into a martial art called judo, and I was really into it. For me at the time, it was mostly about trying to beat my body into a better shape that I thought would give me some level of happiness or I'm okayness, right? Happily, luckily, even though that was my misguided goal or aim with it, which I didn't understand myself at the time, there were a lot of other benefits that came. And I remember going to this one particular dojo week after week, several times a week. And when I would leave the dojo and walk to where the shower room was, there was a big poster on the wall, and it had a picture of an old school samurai. And then the epitaph there was, "Never give a sword to a man who can't dance."
Yes.
Right. And I remember seeing that, and I was just like, it was like my face would melt, when I saw it. Like, I don't get that. But little by little, I just kept seeing it, and something came into me like, yeah. And that's kind of a little bit of the flavor I get with that, what you're talking about, that marriage of compassion and warrior.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere along the lines?
Very much so. One of the most influential books that I read in the early 90s was Men in the Water of Life. And Michael Meade used to talk about, a wonderful teacher, amazing, amazing guy, talk about the making of a sword, that it takes metal, it takes a lot of fire, it takes cooling, it takes pounding, it takes every sharpening to make a sword an effective sword. And I think that's similar to the making of a man. Man has to have some groundedness in his earthy body. He has to be in touch with the water of emotions. He has to be in touch with his own fire to help mold that earth into something usable. And then the whole process of heating and cooling, like that's what life is, heating and cooling. It's not all ups, it's not all downs. There's grief, there's death, there's life, there's love, there's all of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. The making of a sword is a beautiful metaphor on so many levels. It's a beautiful process. So let me rewind a moment, though, because it pops back up. One of the first things you said when I asked you, like, yeah, how did you get here? How did you get on this path? You talked about 3 years old having a mystical experience, and the words you used were you were infused with something. And I'm, you know, at a certain point in my life, I went from a very mundane, ordinary, lower middle class family life raised on all the media of the mainstream US world, right?
Mhm.
Ultimate junk food, I would say, that kind of nutrition.
Mhm.
And I didn't know about anything like spirituality or mystical. And then at a certain point, I had a mystical experience out of the blue. And so now, and from forever forward from there, when I hear mystical, I say, oh, yeah, okay, I know what that means because I have some reference for it.
Sure.
But I realized, like, if somebody had said that to me, use that word mystical, I would have had no idea
Mhm.
what that means. So
Mhm.
any more you could say about what is mystical? What is a mystical experience? What was it for you? And infused, what does that mean?
It's a good question. It's a great inquiry. So, I'm going to tell a little bit of my personal story, if that's okay.
Yeah,
But
please.
first 3 years were not a very happy. There was a lot of trauma that was in my body, and for me to learn how to cope with my own trauma, I had to find a way. It's this kind of stuff I work with my clients on. What do they do
Hmm.
when there's trauma or high anxiety?
Hmm.
And for me, I went internal. I went almost autistic.
Hmm.
And so when this experience came to me when I was 3, it was so out of the ordinary, so extraordinary. It shocked me out of this
Hmm.
autistic kind of coma, where I didn't even know I was there.
Hmm.
But anyway, I'm sitting at my aunt's house. I think I'm 3.5, and um, don't lock me up. Don't call 911. But I hear an inner voice. It says, "Go in and see your little cousin
Hmm.
who is taking a nap." So I tiptoe in her room, and I was scared because her mother was in the kitchen, and this was so out of the ordinary. I didn't know what, but I knew I had to follow this voice.
Hmm.
So I went in, and the voice said, "Okay, reach in through the bars of her crib and just touch her ankle at her Achilles,
Hmm.
just like this, just on each side of her Achilles." This is sensitive for me. And the moment I did, there was a shot of nothing, what I called God, running through my body. I'd have I didn't know what Kundalini was. I didn't even know what God was. I just knew this amazing um, energy shot through my body that was not just mind, but it was embodied experience of electricity, and this amount of love that flowed through me was beyond Niagara Falls. It was so big that I just began to cry. And
Hmm.
just, and so I let go of her ankle. I just touched it and walked out of the room and went in the living room and couldn't tell anybody about this. I mean, how does a 3.5-year-old explain this? So I kept it a secret in my whole life for 30 years until I was exposed to other teachings that talked about Kundalini awakening or Holy Spirit activation or something like that. I began to understand that something very extraordinary happened for me. And I'll call that grace.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for, touching into something that's sensitive for you. That's a gift for us. And what, when you spoke that, what it reminded me of is a story I heard many years ago about a young family and two children. The couple was in the kitchen and they were listening. They had the baby monitor, listening to the baby sleeping, or, that listening in case the baby woke up, and they didn't realize it, but in a similar fashion, their toddler had gone into the sleeping baby's bedroom. And so the parents are in the kitchen, they're listening. Suddenly they hear through the monitor a voice that says, "Baby, baby, wake up, tell me, what does the face of God look like? I'm starting to forget." And I remember
Wow.
just hearing that story. I was like, wow. And part of what I get from your story, and I guess why that comes back, is like there is a way, like what you described it as extraordinary, yet in a way it's probably extremely ordinary. When we're so young, we're so connected to spirit, or the veil is much thinner, and then we go through all the things we go through as we get older and lose touch with it. But it sounds to me in some way like, your cousin, I think you said it was your cousin was there, connected with spirit, with the divine, and in some way was a portal for you to reconnect with it. And that's what you got. Does that make any sense? Is it square?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've never thought about this, and having conversation with you about it is bringing some new understanding.
Hmm.
But I think for the first, from birth to age 3.5, I did not have any connection to God or even myself. There was no self there. There was no God there. So what made this extraordinary was it reattached my umbilical cord, spiritual umbilical cord, to the Creator.
Hmm. That's beautiful.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm curious how this lands for you, but I think of the word mystical, which always sort of puzzled me at earlier points in my life. I also think of it in some way as just connected to the mystery, right?
Mhm.
And in some way I'm saying, is this what happened, Ed? Do you think this is but who knows, right? Like, what, it's grace, right? And part of what that means is it's beyond our human understanding. We're tapping into, touching
Yeah.
into something bigger.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. I think that
So,
whole escape from the mundane of life that we have, what interests me so much lately in my practice was, my own internal practice, but also with my clients,
hmm,
is looking at those attachments from the past that are still woven into my everyday experience. What I
hmm,
mean by that is all the condition. I wasn't born as with the name of Ed Fell. I wasn't. So who am I really? My first vision quest when I was 18, I went off by myself, and I didn't know what a vision quest was. I just knew I had to go in the woods and stay there until something happened.
hmm. Like you felt that as a just an internal impulse or a pull.
Yeah, it was a calling. I had to. And, I've done many vision quests since, but I didn't know what it was. So I just took a journal, and at the top of the journal, I wrote, "Who am I?"
Hmm,
So, oh, at that journal, I wrote, "Yeah, I'm Ed Fell. I'm a man. You know, described myself." But it wasn't till recently I realized that who am I is the wrong question.
hmm,
Who am I not? I am
hmm,
not all those roles from the past. I
hmm,
am not my conditioning that I got from my parents or my culture. I am not an American. I am not just my body. I am not my emotions. I am not my thoughts. So what's left?
hmm.
Pure consciousness, I suspect, or whatever word we want to do. And that's kind of mysterious, isn't it?
Understatement of the week. I'll give you that. Yeah, that's mysterious, right? There's that great little image that we get from India of Indian people are kind of famous for responding to deep questions with neti 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 neti, right? Neti neti, not this, not that. What is it? Hard to say, but it's not that. It's not my
Mhm.
emotions. It's not my name. It's not my role in life. It's not my money or my accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
going deeper. Yeah, that's beautiful.
So what do you think it would be like to really have that as an awareness all the time? That I am not my body, I'm my emotions, I am not my drama. And live in the path of, so many who come into my practice want some certainty about their relationship or their intimacy. They want something certain, something they can stand, some foundation they can stand on or live their life on. But what if we lived more in the mystery and not seek that security of the illusion of certainty?
Yes, that's my answer. Yes, right. There's one of my favorite quotations is the quality of our life is equivalent to the amount of uncertainty we can comfortably tolerate.
I love
Right.
that.
Yeah.
You have to send me
Right.
the link to that quote. I like that.
Yeah. Well, and there's relatedly, there's this beautiful, I wish, actually, I'm going to memorize this now that I'm thinking of it. There's a beautiful quotation from Raina Maria Rilke. I remember shortly after my first quote awakening experience, when I was so unmoored from my previous reality, right? I'd
Mhm.
been shown a bigger world, and I was really nervous because I didn't know what to latch onto in some way.
Yeah.
Um, and the quotation somebody shared with me, it's long, so I'm not going to try and say it, but it was Rilke speaking about living the questions, right? And
Yes.
you know the one I mean, right? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll put that in our show notes here because it's such a beautiful quotation, and it's like if we can release ourselves from trying to know, needing to know, which of course is actually an illusion anyway, because none of that's real. Like what we think is secure is not. It could all vanish in a moment, right?
Yep.
And if we
Yep.
can realize that, then what do we have? We have like pure aliveness and freedom in every moment.
Yeah. And at the same time, the craziness is we have to live in these imperfect bodies that age and fall apart. And at the same time, so there's like two opposing energies. My body's taking me down to be in my body, and something else is wanting to arise or beyond. So there's this kind of pull.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, it's a crazy thing, this being human, right? Being human, being divine, being both at the same time. Well, and
Yeah.
that maybe that's a perfect segue in some way, because I remember now back to when I was sharing about some of your experiences, um, sacred sexuality coach, right? So you just mentioned the craziness of the body and the spirit together, and I'm guessing that's related to the sacred sexuality coach part of your life and experience. Um,
Yeah.
is that accurate? Or, I guess another question is, how'd you get into that, and what does that mean?
One of the biggest shadows we have as people in this current world is the sexual shadow. And certainly it was maybe not told to me directly, but sex that I was infused with was or adopted was it's evil,
Hmm.
it's bad. The top half of our body is sacred. The bottom half is of the devil or Satan or wrong or bad or dark or whatever. So there was always a lot of shame about the expression of sexuality or even thinking about it. Um, but I knew, kind of like that still little voice inside of me that said, go in and put your hand on my cousin's heel, kind of directed me, pulled me at a critical moment in my life to realize that there must be a way to merge spirituality and the body and sexuality.
Yeah.
So for me, it took me going to a teacher. I lived in Philadelphia at the time. I researched a lot of teachers, found one that I wanted to learn from. And rather than do workshops, I wanted to learn from her one-on-one.
Hmm.
So from the first moment of meeting her with this blessing she gave me, I could feel those two energies begin to marry in my body. And Tantra means weaving. So it's a weaving of heaven and earth, of the opposites. And so that's what marrying my sexuality with my heart, with my mind, with all of my chakras was really important to bring myself, my wholeness back together through sex.
Hmm.
So sex then became prayer.
Hmm.
Very holy, pleasurable thing. Even pleasure was taboo in my early childhood. So bringing back pleasure and embracing pleasure and sex, and the way I call it, orgasm is the way that God laughs. So I'm going to celebrate God laughing with orgasm, and then learning to give and receive both of those.
Hmm.
I consider that most people have only two issues in their lives. I'm generalizing a lot, but the ability to give love and the ability to receive it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I was broken in both until I found Tantra and this path.
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Well, I remember one of my teachers years ago, Rajneesh, was very famous as the sex guru, and
Yeah.
one of his basic tenets is almost everything that's painful and messed up for people is they're all twisted up around sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And certainly that was, my mainstream education was same, sex is bad. I'm bad if I'm interested in sex. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and you used a specific word there before, which was shadow, that the shadow part of that. And so given that that's another word that's become a part of the water we swim in, it's worth pausing for a moment, I think, and saying, what does that word mean to you? And for somebody who maybe, isn't so familiar with it, how can you define it in a way that's useful if you're up for it?
I am. Yeah. I'm glad you asked it, because it's probably the most important cornerstone of how I do my own inner growth, as well as how I support others in their growth.
And let me interrupt you for a second, because that's the second time you've said something like that. And I just want to highlight for all everybody in the audience how simple and ordinary it is when you say that, for myself and for my work with others. And that's, I know that about you, and this is how I attempt to live my life as well. There's no separation between your work for yourself and what you do with clients and students and the ways that you serve in the world, right? Am I hearing that right? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
If I'm not doing my inner work, I shouldn't be doing this as a
Yeah.
practice with others.
Yeah.
I'm not safe.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue.
So shadow was a term that was coined, or through Carl Jung, one of the greatest of our time. And the common, if you ask anybody on the street what shadow is, they'll usually speak about something dark within them, or evil, or bad. And even Carl Jung knew, this was astounding to me, really astounding, is that most of our shadow is our brilliance. 90% of shadow material is our brilliance. But the crazy paradox is sometimes we have to go through the darkness to find that light. I mentioned earlier that, and I've had some amazing teachers around shadow, but I mentioned earlier that one of the shadows personas that I shared with the world was my nice guy. You shared yours too. You have one of those too inside you.
Yeah.
And the same guy who taught me, or turned me on to the Mankind Project weekend, said to me one time, I don't want to work with you anymore. I don't know who you are. All I know is your nice guy persona. And I was shocked. This is one of my closest friends. So
Mm.
I went home that night, or maybe it was a day or two later. This was 30 years, some years ago. And I go, I need to confront my nice guy shadow. And I do that by finding the not so nice guy shadow. So I'm taking out my notebook and I'm writing, okay, Mr. Not So Nice Guy, what do you got to say to me? That's kind of one of the ways I love to do work is doing journaling, inner
Yeah.
dialogue with writing. And just like that holy energy that took over for me to do this healing or whatever it was with my little cousin, this same energy started coming up, but it was powerful. It was rageful. It was dark. And it began to write to me on this page. And pretty soon I couldn't even write anymore. I was so furious in the writing. And I was stabbing the journal. And then I was picking up furniture and screaming and throwing it around my office. I had a second floor barn office. And it lasted for a very long time. I knew enough to let this guy run, let it run out of me,
Mm.
let it keep moving. And at some point, that rage transmuted into passion and love.
Mm.
But it wasn't an impotent love. It was a very powerful, you know, uh, energy that became part of what my purpose is. Instead of being milk toast, there was something strong in me.
Yeah,
And then
beautiful.
Mark, and then my buddy and I began to work workshops together again.
Wow. Okay. So let's zoom in a little bit on some of that, because I think I know what you mean when you say, yeah, I'm with you. A lot of people, if you say shadow, they're like, "Ooh, that's the bad part of me," right? That's the
Mhm.
dark part, the evil part. And then you said that it's actually, our brilliance, or a lot of our brilliance is there, and even the words are oxymoronic, right? Shadow is dark, brilliance is light.
Mhm.
So can you say more about what that means? I mean, you said some, of course, in the story that you experienced there in your office, and the not Mr. Nice Guy um, energy that came through. But is there more that you can say to help that become even more clear?
Um, I think we're born with an essential nature that is our true self. You know, I know you have a daughter, correct?
True.
And
Yeah.
you're there when she was born?
Yeah, and it's funny you brought that up, because when you were describing your experience with your cousin, in that moment of holding her heels,
Hmm.
one of the first thoughts I had is I so clearly remember the moment my daughter was born, which ironically was, just up the hill here in Hawaii, in a home in Kula. And that moment when she was born, it was kind of, for me, it felt a bit like I don't know what it's like to go down Niagara Falls, if that could be safe somehow. But
Hmm.
the way my heart just opened, and I was immediately bawling, and it was one of the most intense spiritual experiences I ever had. And it in some way
Hmm.
felt like it was my heart open, but it was like a portal to the infinity of the divine opened up, and I was just overwhelmed by it.
Hmm.
I think you asked me a yes or no question, but yes would be the answer.
But you also remember the experience, most likely, that you were holding something that wasn't just a personality
Hmm.
or had a story yet, that there was pure essence there, was something you could almost smell God on them still,
Hmm.
the newborn. And I think that pure consciousness of that birth is still in us. It's what some
Hmm.
teachers will call the essence, its essential self, the true self, the highest self, the God self, whatever that is. And so life happens, and we forget about that experience. We don't even remember that we were that, like the story of
Mm,
the little boy going into his little brother's bedroom. Do you
mm,
remember the face of God?
mm,
Well, that's a great question.
mm,
Um, so, we get piled on by education and our educational system and propaganda of the world and the church and all these different influences and experiences that we've had begins to cover over that essential self. So we have a hard time finding it.
mm.
Some are finding it through a lot of inner work or psychedelics or something. Um, and shadow work is about chopping away kind of like the outer edge of an onion skin until you get to the core of the essential self again.
Mm,
Shadow work is about looking at the patterns that have created that armor around the essential self and begin to break that down in a safe way, in a
mm.
loving way. Don't necessarily need a hammer. In fact, more inner growth can happen through pleasure and joy than being the heck out of pillows and screaming bloody murder all the time.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. And I'm curious your perspective on this. I have a sense that part of that evolution that you just described, which I would say in some way is realizing it doesn't have to be so intense or cathartic or heavy or dramatic in order to grow, that there are easier, subtler, more pleasurable ways of growing and evolving. Um, I know that that's certainly been part of my own path, is moving through that continuum.
Mm-hmm.
I have a sense that that's also something that's part of the collective consciousness right now. The energetics of where humankind is, where the whole galaxy is in some way, that we're moving into. Maybe it's faster, maybe it's more subtle, but that we don't have to be so primitive, maybe in ways as we used to be. Does that make any sense to you?
It does. Carl Jung predicted before he died that mankind and our world is going through kind of like a black hole experience of shadow.
Hmm.
It's pulling us down so much, and we see that in the world with genocides and wars. And I'm not going to get into politics, but we're seeing a lot of craziness. And he predicted that we would be put into a time of shadow. Um, so I was kind of making this connection in my mind as you were talking about what vibrant living is. And I think people finding their own vibrancy, which you and I had a little discussion earlier that I can bring up again, is finding our own authentic essence and living from that essence as an antidote to the darkness that's in the world right now. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of good in the world, don't get me wrong, but there's certainly a lot of darkness as well. I woke up, the day after the election, more determined to express my mission in my life,
Hmm.
that I will not be defeated.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. Well, and the word authentic, I love. I mean, in part because it's one of my deepest values, authenticity, but
Mhm.
also in terms of vibrancy, right? There's a saying from one of India's great spiritual books, the Bhagavad Gita, that
Mhm.
says it's far better to live one's own dharma, we could say it path or authenticity,
Mhm.
imperfectly, than to live someone else's perfectly, which is
Yes, right.
so being true, being authentic, which in some ways is like, I don't know, as you were speaking it, I see it as throwing off all these, I'm supposed to do this, I should do this, that's the way to do it. And if we throw all that off, then what we have is something that's sparkling and alive and vibrant.
That's right. That's right. And it leaves its own legacy. It's not just for us. It's also broadcasting its own vibrancy,
Mm.
kind of like the sun, right?
Mm. Well, say more about that because I love what you said, though I'm not 100% sure I know what you mean. Broadcasting its own legacy.
It's like heat off of a light bulb or heat off the sun. The vibrancy that you experience, that I experience, is not just for me.
Mm.
In
Mm.
fact, it's not for me.
Mm.
It's for my world. It's for my
Yeah.
people around me. It's for the people I touch at the checkout line at the supermarket. How much can I, share that vibrancy of my own authentic self with them?
Yeah.
I know enough about my essence that it has a lot of joy in it. It
Yeah.
has a lot of laughter in it. It has a lot of play in it.
Yeah. Well, so I would love that you said that because a couple things come to mind. One is there's the wonderful poem quotation a lot of people know from Marianne Williamson. It's not our fear that scares us, it's our brilliance. There's a line later on that says, as you liberate yourself, you automatically are liberating others. And that's part of what I hear in your comment. And, there's something also that I love that you brought to mind, which is there's a man I know who went through was serving on one of the Mankind Project weekends,
Mhm.
and he really had a powerful experience. And he was I think filled up with joy and passion, and maybe touched into more of his authenticity than is normal for him. And
Mhm.
then what he told me about is after that was over, I don't know if it was the same day or the next day or something, he went into a grocery store and he was so exuberant and brilliant and alive that he saw the reflection in, I think, the cashier.
Mhm.
And then it was interesting, his response. He's like, oh, I better tone that down. And because it might be disturbing in some way. And my feeling was like, no, don't turn it down, bring it on. That's what it's for. The world loves it. You made that cashier's day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I remember that same high, leaving my Mankind Project week in Milwaukee to go to the airport and fly back to Philly that night.
Hmm.
And I'm like lit up, that, and it's amazing. I knew I grew about 4 inches, and my heart was a lot bigger. And I'm going through the terminal at the airport, and people stopped. They knew some presence was going on, and the heads turned, and people stopped. They were talking and stopped conversations and then looked over. They knew something was big in the room or in the terminal. And the flight attendants flirting with me the whole flight back. You know, uh, there is something that we're constantly broadcasting something. We're broadcasting vibrancy, or we might be broadcasting something darker.
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ed, time is flying along, and as is always my experience with you, there's about 4,000 more things I would love to speak about and ask you about. Let me pause for a second, though, and say, what haven't we spoken about, or what haven't I asked you about that you would love to bring forward?
Nothing at the moment, but nothing comes to the surface at the moment. But maybe for another time or something. But I want to let you know, I had so much fun with you today. This was really a highlight of my day. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I'm appreciating you and this chance to. We both spoke before the recording that we wanted to create value for others, and I
Yeah.
wanted to create value for you. I was interested in seeing you
Hmm.
expand too.
Hmm. Thank you. Well, likewise, it's a highlight for me, and I know it's a gift for others. And we're not done yet. We still get a little more time. So
All right.
I will, since there nothing came to mind specifically that you want to bring forward. I'll bring us back because I kind of took us on a detour there. You're speaking about sexuality and shadow, and I was like, oh, hold on, let's talk about this shadow thing, right? And you helped illuminate it, ironically enough, to use that phrasing. You helped illuminate it and make it more understandable, I think, for a lot of folks. And we spoke a little bit about sexuality, and there's, I think, enough that's obvious in our culture about why sexuality in general has gotten relegated to the shadows. As you were speaking earlier, I thought of one of my favorite poems from Hafez, mystic poet. There's a line that he repeats twice at the end of a poem. Every desire of your body is holy. Every desire of your body is holy. Dear one, why wait until you were dying to discover that divine truth?
Yeah.
And so as you were speaking about sacred sexuality and part of how that came about and part of that, why that's part of your work, that's what came to mind. What else can you say, though, for people that might be, I don't know, new to that conversation or just evolving and deepening into it, like what it is and what's the importance of it and how to move with it?
Basically, sex created everything in our world. Male and female, plants, trees, animals, us. And even our most precious fluid as men is teeming with life. It's very life-affirming, life-giving. And certainly a woman's body is also full of life and can give life. So it's like a foundational understanding of who we are as beings. We are sexual beings. And often, so many with my couples, I see that there is some block, not just with the sexuality, but with the heart, with soulful kind of connection. And, it's like a foundation of a great relationship doesn't necessarily have to have sex. There's many couples I've taught that had such more deeper connection than just sex, but it is critical to, at some stage in life, it's critical to our own evolution to be able to embrace it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you.
And it's never too late. It's never too late to learn. Yeah. I remember teaching an 86-year-old man and his 84-year-old wife, and they had been married like 60 years or something. I can't remember. And they wanted to learn Tantra. Well, they went from 0 to 60, where they were having amazing spiritual sex 2 or 3 times a day in their backyard in Boulder, Colorado. Like, it's never too late to find the joy in that sex.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, and we've spoken about it in a couple different ways. One of the frames I have for it is because we have, as a culture, our current evolution tended to push sexuality to the shadows or push it down. And you described, like, early on in this conversation about one of your early experiences of transformation being this energy coming up and needing to express it, and it was like caught in your throat. And you mentioned Kundalini earlier, and one of the basic, and just now you were speaking about sexuality as being like the creative force of the universe. Used a little bit different language, but it's part of everything. And in some ways, we could simply say that sexuality is the base of the spine and the fire and the spark of life. And to whatever degree we've tended to push it down or put a lid on it or put it in the shadow, it's just blocking life, blocking vibrancy. And so as I thought of that as you were describing the 86 and 84-year-old couple, right? Like that they took the lid off, right? And I can just feel this like ebullience.
Yeah. And the other cool thing about that story is he was he was a Methodist minister. I love that. That's a great piece.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay. Well, so Ed, for people in our audience that are hearing this conversation and would love to connect more with you, what's the best way?
You can go through my website, edfell.com. Right now, today, it's being redone, but wait a day or two, and it should be up and running. And my email address is edfellmaui at gmail.com.
Okay.
And that's how they can get a hold of me. You can see me on Facebook, and I think you have some other social media stuff attached to the marketing of this program.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and for anybody in the audience that's watching, you can see the website on the screen. If you're listening, then it's Edfell is EDFELL.com, much like you might think, and it's good to know for sure. So awesome. Thank you for that. And I think that sadly brings us near the end of our time. I got one more question for you, if you're willing. It's a big question, impossibly big question. You've got so much experience and knowledge. Can I ask you the big question?
I just got a little scared.
Perfect. I've got you just where I want you then. Yes. Right. No, it's so big that it's impossible, which makes it something that nobody can mess up, because it's that's how it goes.
All right,
so,
now I'm more scared. All right, okay.
All right, good. I'm putting my foot deeper in my mouth. So what I mean though is, if you had to distill all your experience, all your knowledge, all that you share with the world, bring it down to just one thing, and to share with our audience, what's the one thing that will help them to live a more vibrant and thriving life?
I'll keep it simple. To find out what blocks them from an amazing, extraordinary amount of love in their life, what blocks them from giving it, and what blocks them from receiving it. And to discover who we really are at the core. How well do I or you or anyone really know and live from the essential self?
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I love that, given how much we have spoken about in the range of this discussion, really what it comes back to, and this is woven through, I think, our conversation, is that giving and receiving love, which in one way sounds like two things, though no doubt it's actually just one.
Mm-hmm. Very good. That is truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your
Ed,
truth.
thank you, for not just for this time, which I really appreciate you sharing this time with me and with us, but also for your courage in all the work that you have done and are continuing to do in yourself, and also for being such a stellar model of humility and authenticity, and just for being so real and beautiful in the way you share.
Thank you so much. I love this, and I pray that we made recreated some value together today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hope you'll come back and we can do more. So thank you.
All right.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. And for y'all in the audience, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your not just desire for a more vibrant, thriving life, for the action you're taking by investing this time with us and learning. And again, please do take some of the brilliance that Ed has shared and apply it in your life. Try it on. See how you can be more love, give more, free yourself more into love. And y'all, thank you. Come back soon. We got another show coming up soon. And in the meantime, and always, please make your life a masterpiece. See you soon. Aloha, y'all. Mahalo for tuning in to the Art of Vibrant Living show, y'all. I'm Daniel Aaron, and may you live with great vibrancy.